Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Starting this week, I'm going to kick off every few of these conversations with a news item from the previous week. Our space is moving so fast, it's become essential to understand how AI technology is solving old problems in new ways, but also how AI is changing society and fundamentally changing how we as humans interact with machines. You know, on this show, I love to geek out on topics like that. So to kick off this new segment, something I found interesting this week, we learned Val Kilmer of Batman fame, whose throat cancer and subsequent tracheotomy permanently prevented him from speaking, will have his voice restored using technology from an interesting company called Synantic that trains an AI model on sound from his historical movies to create realistic dialogue that will be featured he's in the upcoming sequel to Top Gun, his original hit. It's called Top Gun Maverick, due out later this year. And what they did is an application of large language models, or LLMs, like GPT-3, that use speech or text to generate or predict new speech or text that the author, or in this case, the actor, actually never recorded. We'll also be hearing about kind of the dark side of this kind of technology, using historical speech to create maybe deepfake versions of it. May lead to fraud, or could even endanger people. It's a fascinating topic for AI ethicists as well as academics and engineers. We'll be talking about it more in the future. I want to share that as a kickoff to this new segment. But shifting to this week's conversation, business leaders understand the need to embrace AI, but often, as we've learned on this show, they don't know where to start. Unlike traditional technology, AI has got the power to create and transform new business processes, but it can have unintended consequences when it's misused or misunderstood. Even the basics of AI-first projects, like defining the business case or budgeting for it or measuring progress, are frankly beyond the scope of what most business leaders have ever had to learn. There's a new category of AI consultants that has emerged to help business leaders take AI from concept to launch. They address apprehensions about AI and also help define things like data requirements. They mitigate the risk of, let's say, rogue algorithms making bad decisions. They introduce new AI systems to sometimes reluctant users. Today, we get to learn from a pioneer in this space who quite literally wrote the book on how to become an AI company. Kevin Dewalt started Prolego in July of 2017. He recently published the book, Become an AI Company in 90 Days. Kevin's been helping business leaders around the world make sense of AI technologies for years, after having invested in, founded, advised, and led many high-tech companies like So Helpful, Mad Kudu, and The Motley Fool. Kevin received his BS in EE, Electrical Engineering, at the US Coast Guard Academy, and he did his master's in EE at Stanford. Without further ado, Kevin, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a little bit about your background and maybe how you got into this space.
Thank you so much, Dan, and the pleasure is all mine. I've really been looking forward to the conversation. So I actually built my first neural network at Stanford in 1995, not knowing anything about AI neural networks. I just saw this class that said, AI neural network thinks like a computer. This sounds great. Not realizing it would take me more than 20 years to be able to apply my graduate degree to my work. So right before starting Prolego, my friend of mine had started, and I had started a machine learning startup in the 2015, 2016 timeframe. And the idea was way ahead of its time. It was the technology wasn't mature yet. And as I would go out and talk to different executives at the C level of big companies, they politely said, hey, well, Kevin, your technology is garbage. We don't need it. But while you're in my office, can you tell me about this AI thing? And what I started realizing was that it was the first time since the internet where I saw the combination of fear, excitement, enthusiasm about a new wave that was coming. And I hadn't really seen that since the internet, where C-level executives knew that a big shift was happening, but realized had no processes or understanding of how to deal with it. So myself and Russ Rands decided to found Prolego, and the whole mission was to be able to bring AI to the Fortune 1000. And our thesis was that these bigger companies would want a boutique-focused services company that they could work with to help them overcome this huge obstacle. So knock on wood, we're still around after 5 years and slowly growing. It's been quite a hard journey. Looking back on it, I'd say the biggest challenge is when we started the company, we didn't realize how early the market was. And in many ways, it's still early, which I'm happy to talk about further. So, that's the background. As you said, the 30-year career, the key themes are software founding companies and VC angel investing, which I still do pretty actively. This is the first services company I've ever started. And if I knew it was like to start a services company before, I probably would have done it a long time ago. So that's the background.
Let's see, in 95, you were building your first neural net. I was taking CS106X from a gentleman named Eric Roberts, who wrote the book and was an amazing professor. I don't know if you ever took classes.
I took 106X as well. It was an A and B course, and you could do it as an accelerated X. Yes, I did the same thing. Yeah,
who knows? Maybe we were classmates.
We might have been, yeah. So that was my shock at arriving to Stanford after being 2 years in the workforce as a U.S. Coast Guard officer and having forgotten a lot of computer science and math. It was a rude awakening how fast that class went. So it was the rough introduction to Stanford in the 90s, but how funny.
Imagine that, right? Small world. Well, you and Russ talk about this concept of AI abundance. Maybe describe what that means to you, and maybe if you could take us through a typical like a Prolego customer journey, that'd be great.
Yeah, we came up with the concept after trying to help our customers and clients understand why the world looks like it does today and what's coming in the future. The best way I can describe it, and I'm going to try to do this for a podcast audience, and your audience is sophisticated enough that I think they'll be able to follow the discussion. But if you can imagine what an exponential curve looks like, it has this very long flat period along the x-axis, and then there's kind of this sudden jump up to the upper right when it kind of hits the knee of the curve. And that's the path that exponential technologies follow. So if you look at the history of adoption of microprocessors, personal computers, the internet, electric cars, Bitcoin, pick your exponential technology. They all kind of follow this trend. And what's most interesting about exponential technologies is they go through this very, very long, slow period where they don't work very well. And things look like a linear growth. And 1 month looks a little bit better than the next, and it looks a little bit better than the next. And things kind of proceed along slowly. And if you chart out the future of an exponential growth curve, I'll use electric cars as an example. You would expect Tesla to have 0.3% of the US market share right now if you just plotted their history. But now they have 9%. And it's because eventually these things take off. And so that moment in the knee of the curve where everything skyrockets, we call that the moment of abundance. And so when I'm describing to some of the C-level execs, like, why is it taking so long to make this transition and why is it worth the investment? I have to explain to them that just like every other historical exponential technology, when you hit that moment of abundance, the game's over. At that point, it's too late. And we can see it happening in the marketplace. And it's why Tesla is the most valuable car company in the world and why everybody else is struggling to catch up and is going to be a shell of their former self. And so I have to explain this is why things go very slowly and why it looks like linear growth and why you're struggling to find people and data and algorithms don't work very well. And all the challenges we see in execution, it's all preparing for that moment of abundance. And that's going to happen in about 5 years when that's going to happen for most technologies. Now, different technologies and industries will be on a different curve, but 5 years is a good benchmark for most of the client projects we do. So how does that manifest itself in reality? Let me walk through a case study example with you. We worked with an insurance company, a previous client, on developing some NLP models to accelerate their acquisitions. And I'm just going to, for the purposes of this example, I'm going to call them Golden Insurance Company. That's not their name, but it'll work for this example. So Golden Insurance is trying to grow through acquisitions, and their competitors are trying to grow through acquisitions. And what they found is that they were struggling to get a competitive leg up during the due diligence period of an acquisitions, where they were trying to do pricing and on the onboarding or whatever book of business they would buy from the acquiring company. And the reason they struggled is because there's often a lot of risk associated with the underlying contracts and policies these companies may have written over decades. So how would you, if you're imagine you're the COO of a Golden Insurance company, you want to figure out, how do I mitigate this acquisition risk? Well, one way to do it would be to read every contract and have your lawyers figure out what's in it. And that's what a lot of them still do. And they have a room they work in where they put all the paper, and they got paralegals and staff to try to file through the contracts as fast as possible. And then they say, okay, I'm going to pay about XYZ much for this company. And they put in a bid. But with these NLP large language models, like you mentioned in the beginning, you can have computers automatically read and scan through those things and identify key clauses or areas of regulatory risk that can do 75, 80% of the human labor associated with it. Now, if you can start doing that, suddenly you can take your due diligence period. Not only can you price more accurate faster, but you can take your due diligence period from months to weeks. And as anybody's been involved with any deal in the world knows, that the person who gets the good bid in the first is often the one that wins the bid. And so what's going to happen? Right now, the technology is early. It's hard to build. It's hard to find people. It's hard to scale. And they see themselves kind of growing incrementally. But when you think about what is going to happen in 5 years when this technology gets abundant, Golden Insurance has been investing in is going to have an insurmountable lead that competitors are not going to be able to catch. And we see that across lots of different competitive domains, where C-level execs are asking themselves, when am I going to get an ROI for this? So it's a bit of a leap of faith, but it's a leap of faith informed by history. So that's AI abundance. It's that moment when AI really takes off. And at that point, you're too late. You've either been investing in the technology or you're going to be following somebody else who did.
Kevin, that's a great example. So let's expand on that theme. So you are presumably dealing with a pretty self-selecting group of clients, because they've determined that they have a need and are willing to explore the technology. But even within that self-selected group, what would you say is the biggest blind spot that your clients have on day one?
I would have answered this question very differently a few years ago, Dan. I think I would have given you more of a technical answer that I would have said, well, it's like, oh, the problems of data, or like the problems of talent, or like, how hard models are to be. I would give you some answer like that. And I think I've come to realize that their biggest challenge is not technology. It is changing culture and changing how they work. And they don't realize the scope of the changes in their organization that have to take place for them to leverage this technology. You know this because you're on the front end line of trying to get things to change companies' behavior. But institutions and people have a way of working, and there's resistance to change. And that resistance can come in many formats. It can come from people who are honestly trying to do the right thing, and they think this AI stuff is just hogwash, and they don't want to have the company waste time on something that's not going to work. Or they can have fear of losing control, or fear of losing their job, or fear of not having a team or a budget, or that they're obsolete. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, but organizations resist change. And there's a misperception that resistance to change comes at the C-level. And what we've discovered is that the real resistance comes at the level, 4 or 5 levels below that, in the management level, where they have to actually go in and bring people along and bring in new talent and change how they work. And I'd say that's the biggest blind spot. So when we start working with our clients to help them build strategies, the strategies we develop is usually a combination of, here's all the opportunities you can do with AI, and here's the changes you have to make to go do it. And of course, a lot of the changes are stuff right? They've got to bring on different talent, they got to get their data cleaned up, they got to do ML ops, they got to everything, all the tactical stuff. What we find is that they'll start doing all that, but every day you're running into organizational issues like security policies and governance and how they budget for projects. And what we now do is try to help them develop a set of principles against which they can make each one of these decisions. Because otherwise, the C-level executives come in having to just fight fires every day to figure out how do we execute on this stuff. So that principle could be if we're dealing with like a surveillance or a compliance department in a bank or maybe a regulatory agency. It's like we're going to stay ahead of the people we regulate and the bad guys. Like that can be a principle against which we can execute, or we're going to be number 1 or 2 category leader in our area with AI, or we're not going to get passed by a venture-backed startup in AI. Something like that that helps them guide decisions. And if we have that, that's what allows them to go forward. So the biggest blind spot is putting together the governance and structure and organizational principles to drive change. I realize that's not the sexiest answer in the world, and everybody wants to talk about data and models and everything else. I like talking about that stuff too, but it's really it's the organizational issues that create the challenge.
And spot on.
I think I'm sure you've encountered the same thing.
Yeah, the cultural impediments I think are far greater than the technological impediments.
Yeah, I mean it's in you look at if you've ever tried to do any kind of like sales acceleration work, right? Salespeople, they're used to calling everybody in the list, and their go-to habit is I'm going to call everybody in the list or call the biggest company in the list. And if you give them a machine learning generated like lead scoring, said no, call these 10 people first and keep calling them more and more and more, because that's what the historical algorithm, what's the algorithm predict. Getting them to change the behavior, you don't just give them the score. You're going to have to work with them on an ongoing basis. Okay, why didn't you call the ones in the lead? What did you find out? Is it a problem with the algorithm? Is it the data? Is it training? And these are the kind of changes you have to make within an organization.
Pop culture does us a disservice as well. So the whole notion of the bot apocalypse sells tickets to science fiction movies, but
yes,
you and I in the trenches know that that's actually not the reality of sentient bots taking over. That's not really how AI is being used today.
Yeah, when on that note, when I do executive workshops, I say to them, okay, what do you think your people think about AI? And usually the audience there is fairly sophisticated. They'll describe process improvement, neural networks, and I'll say, okay, let's do an example. And I'll go into Google image search, and I'll do Google image search for the words AI. And you know what shows up? Terminator robot, these funky looking electric brains, or it's doom and gloom. And I said, that's what they see every day. We were doing a workshop with a top grocery store, and I had to tell them, like, look, here's what your employees think. They think when we talk about AI, they think that a cyborg is literally going to pull up in front of the grocery store, walk through the front door, tap him on the shoulder and say, hey man, I got it from here. Like that's what they literally believe. And so this kind of like AI education, we have a lot to overcome to help people understand, like, geez, this is how hard this stuff really is.
I refer to AI as augmented intelligence. I think artificial is really not the right term for it, because first and foremost, we're making humans smarter. It's about forging this partnership between humans and machines, using data to automate routine decisions. And to me, I wish we could introduce more into the popular press so that image search for AI shows some of the benefits of curing patients and making lives healthier, eliminating famine, reducing global warming. Like that's the net impact that AI is having today.
Yeah, exactly. And I've not had a single project where we've eliminated a job with AI. And we've automated a lot of human labor, but in every single instance, the person whose job we automated is like, thank God. Used to spend 20 hours a week doing control F searches through PDFs, trying to find the right section. And eventually I would just print the whole damn thing out and just read every word. And they don't want to do that anymore. So long run, could there be jobs impacts? Absolutely. I completely believe in certain sectors, but it's not going to happen in my career. I just don't see it.
So 27 years ago ish, you built your first neural net. And in the intro to this show, I talked a little bit about LLMs, large language models, and some of the interesting new technologies out there. Putting your technologist hat, is there a particular area of AI research that you think will be the most disruptive, say, in the next decade?
I think the most disruptive one has already happened, and it's what you described. It was these NLP transformer models from the BERT family, even more than the OpenAI GPT family. The BERT one really was a game changer, and I think it's what's lagging is just the execution. But even if you look at what we have on the available today, we've already got 5 years of automation work ahead of us, just with the attention networks from 5 years ago. What most excites me is this is a lot less sexy than automating Val Kilmer's film, or automating or cleaning up Val Kilmer's voice, which is something I really want to check out because that sounds really cool. It's developing training data for these large language models. And if you go on a Medium post or take an online course, you'll be able to do some sort of text classification project where you've got something like the IMDb data set and it's pre-labeled, and you take a transformer and you fine tune it and change the last layer. And this is like the steps you go through like a cookbook. In fact, you might even be able to automate a lot of this now with like a Hugging Face library. But the thing is, you're starting with a set of labeled training data. And when you, in domains like computer vision, if you want to pick out in a computer image, does somebody have a gun in their hand or something like that? It's tricky and you have to do zoning, but you can have relatively high scale labor do labeling of images. There's no way to scale labeling life insurance contracts for regulatory risk. And I can't go into a client who wants to get a project done in a quarter and say, all right, well, first thing is you've got to shut down all your lawyers, who, by the way, are already overworked, and you don't have enough of them, and they're really expensive. And they're not going to do anything for 6 months. They're going to hand label documents for us. It's just totally impractical. So it's the programmatic ways of doing data labeling in text at scale. So the domain is called like weak supervision and label functions. There's companies like Snorkel that have raised a mountain of money of doing this. So it's the techniques for doing that. And in particular with these large language models, we're increasingly on our client projects looking at ways to integrate the data labeling with the model training, so they kind of happen at the same time to accelerate the entire projects. And we're seeing some really good results, but we're constantly scouring the literature and research and published papers to find anyone who's got a better way of doing this. Because economically, it's by far the thing that holds back a lot of NLP projects. It's the cost and time associated with, and we also find this is a lot of data science teams and our clients who are not even aware of the technique, and so they do what they were taught in their data science boot camp or through online courses. Well, we don't have labeled data, so hey, business customers, go give us a bunch of labeled data and we'll build you a model. And that's just not economically feasible. I would imagine you maybe run into similar situations with people running some of the projects you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are defining AI strategies from the ground up for organizations where the strategy and the technology that you help implement could certainly impact millions of lives downstream. How do you think about the ethical implications of the work that you do? And are there ever times where you have to modify a client's business requirements because you feel like it might breach an ethical responsibility you have?
No. So I have a contrarian view of AI ethics. And let me just first caveat the contrarian view by stating that I am actually extremely concerned about AI safety. And I think everything written about like potential AI risk and the exponential growth from self-learning systems, I think as a society and researchers, we cannot spend enough time talking about that. And I think it's a real threat to humanity. On the client side project, I actually find that they spend an inordinate amount of time thinking and worrying about ethics, and it's misplaced. And then let me unpack that a bit, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression where I'm being cavalier about ethics. Their biggest challenge is execution and actually getting things done. And ethics and talking about the ethical implications of the project should occupy some of their mind space. But because I think a lot of people who want to be involved in a project, for good or out of personal career reasons, they don't understand data labeling, NLP transformers, infrastructure, mesh networks, Kubernetes, or how to do this or how to hire people. But what they can talk about is ethics. And so anybody who wants to either be involved in a project, either out of legitimate concern or because they want to, in some cases, slow things down, will jump in and start calling, we have to talk about ethics meetings. And it's a wonderful first meeting to have. But my suggestion to them is like, okay, before you actually dive down this road, why don't you ask your data scientists to come in and have them give you a brief about what they think the ethical issues are on their project? Because I found that data scientists are extremely concerned about this, and there is a cultural interest, and they are very, very aware of what could happen with what they're doing. And anytime you're working in a regulated market, they will push back and speak up, and you really just have to listen to them. But what I find often is that there are not a lot of ethical issues associated with the project. If you're doing a project that's going to automate a tedious task somebody's already doing, then usually most of the ethical issues are around the company's mission and the task, not the AI that you're going to use to automate the task. And so AI ethics are ethics. And you can usually figure out where your issues are by bringing in, just talking to your data scientist. And the other point is that I'd say instead of worrying about the AI ethics of a project, create your governance framework for managing AI ethics. And usually the thought experiment is I'll go through something like this. I'll say, okay, we're doing a project now, we're doing an NLP project. And we're going to use this new technique that your data scientists have downloaded to be able to label and generate training data. And it's very new. It's a paper that was published 3 weeks ago, and they're going to implement the math in Python code from scratch. Now, how are we going to do an ethical review of that? They said, well, we're going to have our model evaluation team take a view of it. Okay, I say, how are they going to do that? Do they understand the paper, the math, the model? Well, no. Let's solve that problem. Let's think about that problem. So is it a peer review among different data science teams that didn't work on it? Like, let's talk about the process we're going to do ethical reviews instead of worrying about ethics.
Have you ever had to push back on data because of concerns that it might over or underrepresent certain populations? And has that ever come across as something that the client may not appreciate how AI works, and that ultimately the quality of the decisions or the decisions themselves are based on bias that could be encoded in the data?
We haven't had to push back because their legal departments are already hyper sensitive to this. And so it's more that it's more having to say, okay, let's like, our lawyers are really, really concerned about this. I'm saying, okay, that's good. Now let's go talk to them about what we do. And we show them how it's built. We have training data that's representative of your data. We can test it. We can see how bias would happen. We can look at the results. And usually they will come back to something like insurance underwriting is a great example. This comes up a lot. Like, well, the lawyers and people say, well, now that you're showing us these models, we actually kind of understand more what's happening than we do with the underwriters that we hire, who may only have 3 months of experience in our company. And we don't know who or they're contractors making decisions. And we don't know who these people are or how they're making decisions. So that's usually where that's usually how the conversation plays itself out.
Our space, in the case of PeopleRain, we're automating the resolution of employee HR and IT requests. And so there is often PII, personally identifiable information, involved. And one of the ways where AI can add the most value is doing things like find the most appropriate resource or make the most appropriate recommendation for how to resolve an issue. A conversation that we frequently get into is that customers don't necessarily appreciate how inherently biased the human's decision-making process is.
Exactly.
And so oftentimes we're eliminating bias from the process by democratizing it using data.
And Dan, we could riff on other technologies, but it's often that when any new technology comes, like, people point out like the problems. And I'll just go on to a topic that might be relevant to your audience, but the power consumption by crypto. Like, of course, it's a big issue, but what is the power of every bank, every ATM, driving the carts of money around? I mean, guys, let's take a step back and look at the whole problem and educate everybody about what we're really trying to solve. Like you worried about AI bias? Yes, I'm more worried about people bias because I see it everywhere I go. So yeah, completely agree. I know, but I don't know if you run into this one as well. But I guess in your domain, we worked on a couple projects where we're trying to predict employees at risk for turnover or leaving. And in that one, there is a strong resistance by employees to have Big Brother watching. So that one, you really have to, there's a lot of conversations that have to take place about what are we actually using to train the models. And unfortunately, the signals you really wanted to use, at least in the use cases we had, if we could read everybody's email instead of their conversations, that would tell you more than absenteeism or these other correlated features.
Yeah, it's a great example. I always recall the famous Andrew Ng quote, "Let's not worry yet about the problem of overpopulation on Mars."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you extrapolate out far enough, these are all issues, but we need to make sure we're solving the right problems in the right order.
Absolutely. Yes. And if right now, we don't have data to train the models. Okay, well, we don't have to worry about AI ethics. We don't have data. Let's solve the data problem first.
So we started talking a little bit about these themes of the bot apocalypse and your Google search for AI. Do you feel like ultimately will AI create jobs, eliminate jobs, or enhance jobs that exist today?
In near term, enhance jobs. Longer term, create and eliminate. Maybe some create today, but I think it's going to be it's creating among the the subsection of people who are already advantaged in society. I mean, long term, I think there is a job risk. I am an optimist on this, and overall, though, I think the AI dividend will lift humanity. And why do we need corporations powered by people paying taxes to government to fund our schools and healthcare and roads? We could have a peopleless company that doesn't have employees but still generates economic value. We can tax the heck out of it because they won't have a lot of voters in the company, and the company will still be profitable as heck. We can return that money to real people. So, but yeah, longer term, I do think it is going to issue. It's something we're going to have to pay attention to, but it's not one in which I see manifesting itself anytime soon. I think the labor shortage has really put a lot of those fears at ease. I was a big follower of Andrew Yang's movement and his books and everything. So and his Forward Party. So I'm an advocate of his. But I think the fact that we can't find gardeners, carpenters, waitresses, or really anybody right now is kind of taking the wind out of some of that argument, at least the near-term fear.
So from your client work, can you think about one new field that will likely be created by AI?
A new field, I think it will be maybe field is not, but a means of working of people getting used to working. Part of the work will be training machines and training algorithms. So instead of doing things myself, my job is to look at what's happening and train the machine to do that automatically. And the tools for doing that are getting better and better. And I mean, you probably see this the first time you build an end user feedback tool from a model where they either vote up and down on a particular score, or they just call the developer and say, this thing is spitting out garbage. You can already see their work patterns changing, and they like it. I mean, people actually, when they see, well, that algorithm didn't do what I wanted to, it didn't give me the right results, and they sit down with data scientists and say, this is how I work and this is what I'm really looking for, and they come back and the model's better, it gives people tremendous job satisfaction because suddenly they're in a creative problem solving mode, and not in a, all right, time to read through 15 more policy documents today looking for the right paragraph. And so it elevates the quality of their work and their engagement.
So let's say you're talking to a room full of high schoolers today, and they want to future-proof their careers, being fully aware that they're going to graduate into a workplace where they're going to coexist with machines. What are the skills that you're telling them to invest in now?
Learn how to code, learn how to program anything. That's probably the same advice I give anybody right now. Whatever you learn is going to be obsolete, but the thinking process will never let you down. So to the degree you have the interest and aptitude to do it, it's worth sticking out. It's very hard and it takes a long time. And when you meet the 18-year-old who seems to be a genius, and how do they pick up programming so quickly? That person may have started like I did when they were 12 years old. So they may already have 6 years of programming experience under their belt. So that's usually my recommendation. Obviously that doesn't work for everyone, but that's usually where I'd suggest for most people. Like, even if you're not going to be a programmer, just take a programming class. Just learn how to code anything, because it will change the trajectory of your opportunities. You've got a relative who just got a degree in environmental science. And she's like, well, I'm not sure where I want to go. I was like, look, learn how to use data. Take a basic data science class. I know you're not as into that, but if you can get those skills and understand what it can do, it's going to elevate you way ahead of all your peers who just look at it as magic and shrug their shoulders.
Kevin, the time has flown by, but I got to get you off the hot seat. I want to get your perspective on one last question. I ask this one frequently. Polish your crystal ball. What's one workplace behavior that will be common a decade from now? Say, we're chatting again, it's 2032, that today would just seem like science fiction.
It will be it will be algorithms generating text, natural language generation. It'll be algorithms generating text for us. And the idea of lawyers sitting down and drafting documents from scratch, or sending long emails or letters. We do a lot of with like regulatory and compliance agencies. And of course, a lot of what they produce is correspondence. And that's going to be automated. I mean, right now the NLG stuff we see is sports scores and these annoying little, like, Netflix stock was down relative to competitors yesterday. This kind of, so it's way, way early. I don't think people appreciate how early it is, but by 10 years, that's a problem that we're going to start seeing solved. So the idea of people actually spending time handwriting, got some misgivings a lot about that, so that I think we will lose something, and not having, writing skills will take a hit like my reading skills have. I get better at skimming Twitter than I do reading long papers, but that's what I think will most surprise us.
Kevin, when you come back on another episode, and we'll see how all this prognosticating ends up working out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate what you're doing. Fantastic conversations. Your podcast is great, and I'm really excited to see how your company's evolved too.
Thanks, Kevin. Good hanging out. And before I let you go, where can our listeners learn more about you and the work of Prolego?
Best way is prolego.com, Prolego.com, or you can just look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me. Our book and our comic book are a great place to start. So if you've never read an AI comic book, we created the world's first AI comic book. It's called Adventures in AI. And so if you know nothing about this technology, or you're interested and you don't want to read a book, you can read a comic book.
Well, there you have it. Kevin Dewalt from Prolego. Great hanging out. And gosh, that's a wrap for this week. I'm your host, Dan Turchin of AI and the Future of Work. But we're back next week with another fascinating guest.